Here's the question for you. What defines success for Nebraska football?
You are Locked On Huskers, your daily podcast on the Nebraska Cornhuskers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey gang, DP here, Locked On Huskers. Thank you for making Locked On Huskers your first watch and listen each and every single day. Thank you to you everydayers, you folks who come in, hang out for 30 minutes or so, getting this content. Greatly appreciate it. We'll talk to Mark Onweiler. Let him tell you about Built Bar.
Thank you, DP. This episode of Locked On Huskers is brought to you by Built Bars. Now, if you're like me and you're trying to make healthier choices with your food, but you don't want to compromise on taste, you've got to try Built Bars and Built Puffs. Seriously, they taste so good, you're not going to think they're good for you, but they are. They've got incredible flavors like cookies and cream, peanut butter brownie, my favorite, churro, and I got to be honest, I'm not entirely sure how Built does it. The macros on them, incredible. Only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and 17 grams of protein. And now, you don't even have to wait to get a box. In the past, you've always been able to order them from Built.com. Now, if you're near a Sam's Club or a Walmart, and chances are you are, you can just hop in there, go over to the pharmacy section, grab yourself a box of 4 of them in flavors like cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puff. Or, like always, get all of the flavors over at Built.com. Check them out, Built Bars and Built Puffs, right now at Built.com. DP, back to you.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. I want to thank you folks once again for making Locked On Huskers your first watch and listen each and every single day. A couple of things we're going to cover in this episode, and I kind of need your help, right? I need your help. Husker Nation, I need a GPS. I need a boundary that we're going to follow when we have conversations about Nebraska football for the next several months until we get to end of August and game 1 in Minneapolis. I need your help. So I'm asking for help me, help you, because I don't want to talk about Nebraska football with a standard that's unrealistic. I don't want to have to prognosticate about some grand version and grand vision unless Husker Nation actually feels like, you know what? This football team can do this. But I want to have realistic conversations about the University of Nebraska football. And so, a couple of things in this episode. One, what defines success for the football program this season? Right? And I remind folks, talking about the team, this year's team, this very specific roster and very specific situation and circumstance. And then talking about the program, because the program is the accumulation of teams through standard, ritual, rites, that. It's everything, culture. So the program, what could be less than stellar seasonally for the team could actually still be a step up for the program. So I want to figure out in having this conversation with you today. In the first segment, we'll talk about the team. And then in the second segment, we'll talk about the program. What will define success for the team? And then what will define success for the program? Because they're different. They are different. Later in the week, we're going to get back on the roster and the scholarships, and we'll talk about whether you can add through subtraction and changing the roster around. And then that requires several different discussions over talent and matching it with the scheme. But we don't particularly know all of those scheme ideas yet. We haven't seen them in effect. We haven't seen them in game form. So we'll have plenty to talk about this week when it comes to Nebraska football. But what I want to start with this team. For a Husker fan, for you, what will define success for this team? Is it quality of play? Is it a more solid foundational scheme? Is it a scheme that you believe in? Does that make it successful? Is it a roster that you're proud of as a Husker fan? Right? Does it provide quality of people and quality of Big Ten football play? Somebody that makes you proud as a fan that this roster is wearing the N on their head and on their chest. What's required of that? Because the individual players make up the team. The program we'll get to. But when you look at the roster, what will define success? And is it just wins? Is it just wins? Because you could say, if this team goes to Minnesota and wins, is there a way that they could win that would make you feel prouder about them than them battling and losing? Can this team go 1-1? Can this team lose to Colorado and you still be proud of it? Would you define losing? Is there any way for you to define a trip to Minneapolis and a loss as successful? And I'll say that again because I want to be sure. Is there any way that this team could travel to Minneapolis on opening day and lose to Minnesota and you feel like it was a successful trip? If they win at Minnesota, it's successful. Can they lose at Minnesota and have it be successful? If you win at Minnesota and then you lose to Colorado, is that success? If it's vice versa, if you lose at Minnesota and then you beat Colorado in Boulder, is that success? There's a huge difference between 0-2, 2-0, and 1-1 coming back home for week 3. And the team's identity, we still may not know who this team fully is until week 5 or maybe week 6. If this team is 2-0 and then it comes home to Northern Illinois, success, the only measure of success for Northern Illinois at home at Memorial Stadium is a win. That's the only measure. No matter what happens before at Minnesota or Colorado, the only measure of success against Northern Illinois and Louisiana Tech is wins. Then I ask, if this team is 2-2, would you deem that successful as a fan? If they return to Lincoln September 30th to face Michigan at 2-2, would you call that success? At 3-1, I think we would all 3-1 and 4-0, we would call it successful for the team. 2-2, I'm not sure. Now, a win against Michigan, no matter what, is success. That's just the standard. You beat the champ. Okay, it's success. It means more if they're 3-2, like, because that means a 3-game win streak, and you're getting better after 2 losses, right? Like you're starting to gain momentum, and you're starting to settle your personality and your identity. But if you lose at against Michigan, if you're 2-3, there's still hope, but not as much. How you lose to Michigan would matter. How you win against Michigan, nobody cares. Just find a way. Defining success is a thing. It's important. I need your help. Put them down in the comment section. We'll throw a break here. We'll come back. I want to stand corrected because I said we were going to get to the program. We're probably not going to get to the program side of this thing until next episode. Because as we talk about this, the storytelling behind this season, we can kind of wrap our brain around. So let's do that. When we come back, we'll talk more about the schedule and defining success for this year's team. We'll get to the program in another episode. But in this one, let's talk about success for this Nebraska Huskers team on Locked On Huskers. Hey gang, DP here, Locked On Huskers. Yeah, I'm having a good time. I want to thank you for hanging out with me. If you have not subscribed to get the content, please do. We're at 1,300, but I know that there's more Husker fans than that, and hopefully there's more of you that are jumping onto the content and getting it. It's that time of year where the additional stories need to be told and additional questions need to be asked, and that's what we're going to do over the course of this. We were talking about the team. What would define success for this team? Now, again, winning against Michigan at Memorial Stadium would be defined as success no matter what happened before that, no matter what happened after that. That would define it as success. So we're trying to find common ground for success. Playing well and then losing at Minnesota, the fan base would be split. Losing to Minnesota and then beating Colorado would probably make everything all right again. Losing to them both could be written off as growing pain and newness and lack of experience, and could be written off as a lot of things. But Northern Illinois and Louisiana Tech, in order for success to be tied to this season, both of those games have to be won. And as a matter of fact, first of all, Northern Illinois, they have to win no matter what. Like, if it's a 1-point game, success would still be there. Now, you wouldn't be thrilled, but a win is the thing. The same for Louisiana Tech on September 23rd. Like, you want it to be pretty, but I don't care. Get me a W so that the Michigan game has value and it has sauce and it has flavor and you feel like there's some momentum in the building. And then how Michigan plays out certainly will tell you where we stand and with the definition of success. Illinois, they go to Champaign, and after Michigan, now if they beat Michigan, man, there's so many. You tell me, how big is Illinois? And I'm not sure which is the bigger game. I'm not sure which game tells you whether this year's team, is successful, good, whether you're proud of them. I'm not sure if it's the Illinois game in Champaign or after a bye week, Northwestern at Memorial Stadium. I'm not sure which is the bigger game. Because after Michigan, if you beat Michigan, you have to beat Illinois. You have to beat Illinois. You lose to Illinois after beating Michigan, you have negated beating Michigan. Correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. But what happens against Illinois, because if you lose to Michigan and then you go to Champaign and you show out, that's success. If you lose to Michigan by a close score and then you lose to Illinois by a close score, there will be some in the fan base that say, yeah, that's okay. But under zero circumstances is losing to Northwestern okay. The season, circle it. If you want to be able to identify this season as successful, a win at Memorial October 21st against Northwestern is mandatory. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? Like you could be 5-1 and you can't lose to Northwestern. You could have 5 wins. You could have 4 wins. You can't lose Northwestern. If you've got 2 wins, you absolutely cannot lose to Northwestern. Like, that's how big this Northwestern, and it's a sad statement of affairs, and it lets you know where we stand. But my goodness gracious, that's pretty that's pretty insane. You think about that. That if you were to rank the games, now, as much attention and focus as people have put on Colorado, and as much venom and vinegar we have as a taste for Minnesota and PJ Fleck, who does Nebraska have to beat more, Northwestern or Minnesota? Like, what's the more important game to win? You beat Minnesota, you think you're going to beat Northwestern. But if you beat Minnesota and then you lose Northwestern, you have lost the value system. Like, that's crazy to think that this is where it is. Now, this is also where Matt Rule and his coaching staff and this team can change the perspective on Nebraska football. It can change the way people talk about it. If you get the 2 mandatory wins, and if you steal one of the first 2, just, and maybe that should be, a topic for a conversation, is whether the expectation of winning those games is real or not. I'm open to having that conversation, whether we should be talking about Minnesota as a possible win. Is that a step down in the program, that we're not sure that we can go to Minneapolis and get wins? Or that Deion and his new staff at Nebraska would feel like, okay, this is a big win. It should be an assumed win. But we don't make assumption now, because assuming wins gets you in trouble. I would ask you, am I wrong in that we as if you're thinking as fans, are we okay with assuming wins in week 3 and 4 against Northern Illinois and Louisiana Tech? Is that smart? Is that wise? Put your comments down in the comment section. Let me know whether you're assuming wins over Northern Illinois, Louisiana Tech, and Northwestern. Whether that should be allowed and whether that will help identify. And let me tell you, that sets the table for late October and 5 really interesting matchups. And again, it will help us identify and define what success will be for Nebraska football. We'll do that when we come back to Lockdown Huskers. Hey, gang, DP here again. Thank you for making Lockdown Huskers your first watch and listen each and every single day. Listen, this schedule thing has really got to my head. I don't know. Like, I really, I'm concerned because Northwestern might be like, is that more important than Michigan? Like, if you win at Northwestern, it's not as important as if you lose to Michigan. If you beat Northwestern, I'm not sure what it does to Minnesota and Colorado. But as a coach and a player, I will tell you, first things first, win the first game, beat Minnesota, and then let everything else fall in line. That really should be the focus. And that is the focus, is beat Minnesota. And again, there are some advantages. And over the course of the summer, we'll talk about the advantages of Matt Rule facing this PJ Fleck Minnesota team without tape and without knowledge of what they're going to do and what it causes Minnesota coaching staff and players to do. But we'll talk about that later in future episodes of Lockdown Huskers. So again, Northwestern, win or lose. Losing puts a dark cloud and thunder around the program, around the team, and would mark success as unlikely if they lose to Northwestern at home. The following week, it's Purdue. And I just have to say, in order to call this season a success, beating Purdue is really high on the list of things that should be done. Like it's important. And here's why. Because that puts you in a stretch. Like if you're, let's say for the sake of this thing, with 4 games left, that if you have 2 wins or 3 wins, you still have a chance later in the season with more experience in play, better understanding of the system, better perspective on the talent on your roster and which players are playmakers in actual games rather than practice squad, stars. Those people exist, and Matt Rule will have to get some understanding for how he's going to deal with this coaching staff and this roster on game day. The fan base is sitting back watching, waiting. Please tell us you're good. Please show us that you're good. Please allow us to buy in. Please allow us to be loud for you. And with Mel Tucker and Michigan State in East Lansing, a huge statement of success will be made on November 4th. Also, circle it. November 11th, Maryland. That's an absolute mandatory win for this season to be successful. I want to say that you need to win 2 of the 3 games against Purdue, Michigan State, and Maryland for this season to be a success. Because if you have very little other success, look, you can beat Northwestern and you can win the 2 first home games. That puts you at 3 wins facing Purdue, Michigan State, Maryland. You could actually see yourself at 6 wins easily, or not, because Maryland has talent. They always have talent. They're better coached than we assume. And then, just for grins and giggles, just so you understand that, then you've got to visit Camp Randall to face a Wisconsin team that, again, they're developing and reforming themselves as well. And we know what a gauntlet it is to face Wisconsin and then Iowa. This year, the battle for the trophy comes to Lincoln, Black Friday. And the streak has been broken. And circle Iowa. It's a big, huge game in determining whether this football season and this team had success. Beating Iowa, we know now that it can be done. Like, there are players on the roster that actually know what it's like to beat Iowa. You couldn't say that the previous years. This group, there are players that know, that went into Iowa and got a win. So if you want to circle success for this season, a big, huge, honking date is November 24th, Lincoln, Nebraska against Iowa. To define success for this team, some have said 6 wins is a successful season. Does that mean that 5 is not? Does that mean that 5 wins for Matt Rule would be a disappointing year? 4, we know. 4 is, look, there'll still be 25% of the fan base that says it's okay, it's his first year. But the rest of the group is not going to be happy because the PTSD is real. 6 wins, some would say success. Most would say successful. 7 wins, 8 wins, throw confetti. Throw confetti. But as we learn who this team is, we'll learn who the players are going to be. We'll learn who the coaches are and how they handle situations, circumstance. The fans will learn whether to let their expectation hopes run wild, whether they will drink the Kool-Aid, or whether the Kool-Aid spills and makes a mess. It's going to be an interesting few months. Thank you for making Locked On Huskers your first watch and listen each and every single day. And we'll close with the 3 words that mean so much. Go Big Red.